Welcome to Sailing El Jaleo. I am a mid-40-year-old who in my early 40s became disillusioned with modern society and all of its promises and pitfalls. Feeling that life was getting a little too boring, I decided to do the logical thing, which is to buy a 40-year-old sailboat and spend the next 3 or 4 years converting it into a long-range, off-grid sailing vessel. Or it might have just been a midlife crisis, who knows. From there, I enlisted the help of my trusty crew, and we've been spending the last 3 years going up and down the east coast of the United States, learning how to sail, learning how to read charts, how to navigate, how to read tides, and basically just how to survive on a sailboat. From here, we plan on spending one more summer up north, doing one last round of upgrades before finally escaping the United States in late 2024 or early 2025. These are our adventures. Feel free to come along if you'd like. Last week we made our way back to St. Augustine, where we did some reprovisioning in preparation for our journey north. We still had a couple of items left to do, and El Jaleo and Mother Nature were both conspiring against us as we had some planned maintenance, some unexpected breakages, and some unexpected bad weather. But by the end of the week we finally got back on the road to head north. We didn't make it very far, but we started the journey, which is the big thing. I guess we might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. Before heading north, there were a couple of routine maintenance items that we needed to knock out, and the first was to change the zinc that is in the heat exchanger for the engine. So there are two streams. There's the coolant that goes in the engine, and then there's raw water that comes in from the outside. And there is a stainless steel heat exchanger where those two fluids go through and they exchange heat, and that prevents salt water from getting in the engine and corroding it. So over time, that stainless steel of the heat exchanger would break down if you didn't use an anode or a sacrificial anode. So in this one we use zinc. They're little zinc pencils, and it's got a lower reduction potential or a higher electrode potential than the stainless steel. So when something corrodes, it's actually the zinc rather than the stainless steel. So you do have to change this zinc pencil routinely. I had been changing it on the same frequency that I changed the transmission oil, which is once every 250 hours, but I'm finding out that is not enough. The zinc pencil is getting corroded faster than that. So I'm going to change the frequency at which I change that zinc, or at least check it, and I'm going to do that once every 100 hours when I do my engine oil changes. And I also had to change the transmission oil. That has to be changed every 250 hours, and it was just about due. I still had about 5 hours left on it, but I thought I might as well go ahead and get it changed before we started the long slog north. As per usual, the crew was essential in performing the maintenance tasks. Once we got the tasks completed, our Chief Morale Officer Hanwi decided it was time for a 15-minute break before we moved on to our next chores. After the crew completed their 15-minute breaks, they put back on their supervisor hats and observed as I scrubbed the hull of the boat. The new handles that I got weren't quite as long as the older one, and I couldn't reach very far down the hull with them, so I took the old broken handle and I taped two of them together, and that allowed me actually to get down further than I could before. And there was a little more growth on the hull than I had thought, so it did take a little bit of elbow grease. The first day it was a little bit rough, and I knew the next day was going to be calmer, so I did one side of the boat on one day, and then I waited till the next day when it was calm. And the tides can really rip through here, so I tried to wait to do the scrubbing until we were at a slack tide, so I didn't have to fight against the current while trying to scrub the hull with one hand while holding onto onto El Jaleo with the other hand. So it was a little bit of a choreographed dance, but at the end of the day we got her all done. And the scrubbing wasn't super hard, with the ablative bottom paint. The growth that was on there came off relatively easily. So all in all, it wasn't too bad of a chore to complete. One other thing I had to do was to remove the wind vane's rudder and get it cleaned up. That had a ton of growth on it. That was probably the dirtiest thing out of everything. And the wind vane is an autopilot. It's used primarily offshore, and it can steer the boat, and it actually makes rudder inputs based upon the wind. There's like a big paddle on top that catches wind and it uses the wind to steer the boat. It's actually a pretty neat thing. But the rudder was filthy, and I always leave the rudder on just in case our primary rudder were ever to break. If the tiller arm broke or if something in the mechanism of the rudder broke, I could unlock a couple of pins, and there's a very small tiller handle on the autopilot there on the wind vane, and I could actually use that small rudder to steer the boat until I could get it somewhere that, you know, safe where we could anchor. So it's basically just a backup rudder in case something goes seriously wrong. But I just took it out, got it cleaned up, and this would have been an aquarium. You know, I used to keep saltwater aquariums for, I guess, most of my life now, ever since I was 20. And there were just tons and tons of copepods and amphipods, and the life that was on this rudder really was astonishing. It was just teeming and roiling with little amphipods. It was really neat. But I did scrape them all off, and then I washed them back into the ocean. So hopefully most of them survived. After completing our planned maintenance, we decided to head into Comanche Cove Marina one last time. I wanted to make sure all of our diesel tanks were full. I wanted to fill up the unleaded tank in the dinghy and also take on a full load of water. And that is when stuff started going sideways. Hey y'all, that's an engine. So today we were making our final preparations for leaving, and we went into Comanche Cove to get fuel and water so we could leave in the morning, and a couple of things happened. So when we were going to leave after we got our fuel and water, there was no water coming out of the exhaust. So raw water comes in through here, and there's a little strainer there. Then it goes to a heat exchanger on the back of the engine, and that's where the engine coolant exchanges with that raw water, and that cools the engine. And then from there, that raw water is routed through the exhaust on the boat, so the exhaust doesn't overheat and burn up the fiberglass. So there's constantly a little sputter of water coming out of the exhaust, and if that stops, then you know you got a problem with your raw water. And when I started up the motor, or the engine, there was no water coming out of the exhaust, so I knew we had an issue. So I checked the strainer, and that was clear. So then I knew the blockage had to be somewhere in here. And with this cap off, I actually opened up this valve, and water was just trickling in. So that was a sure sign that it was in here. I tried to snake a wire through that elbow, but I couldn't get it. So I had to take this filter housing off, take this line out, and then remove this elbow. And then I was able to get down into the ball valve, and sure enough, there was a blockage on the outside. So that got fixed, and then back here is our fuel filter, and you'll see there's a little drip bucket underneath of it, and that I noticed was full, which it's never full. It usually only drips maybe once every 10 or 12 minutes. And so there's a little nut on the bottom that's, I don't know if you can see it down there, but it's got a gasket on it. So to get to that, it's too tight down in here to get a wrench on it, so I had to actually remove the housing, which is to take off these compression fittings and then unmount it from the wall. It seems like it'd be easy, but it's pretty tight in here. You can only get like a 1/16 of a turn on these nuts at a time. So it took about an hour and a half, but I got it out. I tightened up that bottom nut, and it's greatly reduced. It hasn't stopped dripping completely, but it's a plastic housing in a nylon nut, and I didn't want to over tighten it and be screwed. So here you can see it's been a couple of hours, and there's just, I don't know if it'll focus, but there's just a little splatter of fuel in the bottom there. So it's definitely diminished its leak greatly. I might have to change it once a week or something. So a little bit of excitement before we get back on the road. But if there were going to be issues, I'm glad they happened today, so we could get them fixed. If that had happened tomorrow when we were motoring, there are plenty of places around here you can pull off an anchor, but still, it's not a surprise you want to encounter when you're underway. So I'm glad it happened today. We got it fixed, and tomorrow we'll get back on the road. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. After an event-filled day, the crew were tuckered out. Neptune was up top sleeping on one of his cushions. He's never really asleep. He had one eye open, always hunting for dolphins. Hanwi and Linus, on the other hand, were tuckered out downstairs, but they managed to keep an eye on our beer supply. Hey y'all, good foggy morning. We were going to get up early this morning and take off. We were going to try and make it all the way up to Atlantic Beach. But as you can see, there's a lot of fog. Pretty sure that'll show up on camera. I can see that boat. There's one I can just barely make out back there. Looks like the camera actually cuts through the fog a little better than my old eyes do. Oh yeah, there's another boat back there. Those are probably, I don't know, 1,000 feet away. But that's about the limit of visibility. So it is just not safe to move right now under these conditions. After a couple of hours, the fog began to dissipate and we were chomping on the bit to start heading north. We originally wanted to get up super early and head all the way up to Atlantic Beach, and we wouldn't be able to make it. It was getting close to noon, and we were okay with that. One of our favorite anchorages is the Mile 769 anchorage, and that's only 6 miles north of St. Augustine. So the current had just, or the tide had just changed, so we were going with the tide. It would only take us about an hour to get there. So we decided to make a run up there. It is one of our favorite anchorages. It's reasonably protected. There's a nice stand of trees along the shore that protect from east and northeast winds. And a lot of times the wind is blowing from the ocean inland, which is from the east, so it gives good protection. And there's also a sandy beach there where the dogs can run around, and it's always fun. There's lots of trees and stuff to kind of duck in and out of, and the pups like exploring there. So right at the end of the video, I forgot to turn it off, so you'll actually see us. And the first thing we did when we got there was load up the crew in the dinghy, and we headed to the beach. And that's all we have time for this week. I would love to give a massive shout out to my Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I would not make these videos. And this week we have a brand new patron member. Her name is Natalie Linehan. Thank you very much for climbing aboard the Patreon crew. We're glad to have you, and we really appreciate your support. Our Patreon crew is Joan and Judy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise and Eli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, Matthew Spotten, Peter Allen, and now Natalie Linehan. Thank you guys so very much. You really keep us going. I do have one legacy patron member. Her name is Joan Lindbow. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We really miss you, Joan. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That helps us out more than you'll ever know. Hitting that little thumbs up button is absolutely free, so go ahead and give it a click. Alrighty, that's all we've got for this week. I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.